Sometimes what I need is a really calming, low pressure painting session. And in moments like that, when things might be a little bit chaotic and crazy out in the world, and I know that I need to shut my brain off and spend some time creating, that's when I love to make these cool little concertina art books. I've done these a few different ways on a few different types of paper, and in this video today, I've just used a really large piece of drawing paper because I wanted to be able to have like big, expressive, really large like brush strokes and marks so that I could let out some energy so that it could be a really expressive piece. The other really cool thing about using such a large piece of paper is when I cut it up, it makes a really long concertina. So there's lots of pages to flip through. I'm going to show you how I did the painting and creating part, and then I'll show you the like cutting and binding section at the end so that you can feel comfortable to make your own book as well. If you guys try this project, let me know. I would love to hear about it. And as always, if you have questions, let me know in the comments. I kicked off this project with a really large piece of drawing paper and some of my favorite materials. These right here are the Stabilo woody pencils, and I have them in a cute little ceramic cup that I made in college. Just a little fun side note. So I started with these because I just want to kick off with some really relaxed scribbles, just kind of loosening up. And I know that these marks are probably not going to show through a whole lot at the end. I did choose two different colors there, and like I said, just kind of scribbled around and got like a little base layer going. So then I started grabbing some paints, and the first one is Nickel Azo Yellow, and it is a Blick fluid acrylic. And I started spreading that around with my Catalyst Wedge tool. And I'm not trying to cover the entire paper, I'm just kind of scattering around and adding little bits of paint in different sections. Then I added the golden green gold with the silicone shaper brush. And this one's also a fluid acrylic. Because this paper is pretty thin, it's a drawing paper, but it was like the largest paper that I had, so that's why I wanted to use it. I decided to start adding some gesso. I love using gesso in different mixed media projects. What it's kind of doing here for me is kind of helping thicken up the surface a little bit, adding some texture, and it's going to give it a little more like tooth or something for the materials to grab onto. Because in a session like this, I am really focused on having fun and experimenting, and it's a time where I have several different materials out and I'm experimenting with different things. It's almost like a fact-finding mission, like the playing and experimenting is going to allow me to learn different things and take that away into like future painting sessions for like different abstract and mixed media projects. Off to my left-hand side, I have a mixed media sketchbook, and that's what I've been kind of using for a palette and a place to go over and scribble and use almost as like a little assistant, like over to the side. But since I'm not using a paint palette, then this becomes like a page in my sketchbook rather than wasting any paint at all, like putting it on some type of palette. This is a Lucas paint, and I'm rolling that around with a brayer. And then here's another Lucas paint. This is one of my favorite colors, indigo. And I'm just using a really old paintbrush, and it has no water on it. So I'm just using dry brushing to kind of flow little lines like all around the paper. Personally, I love experimenting with different types of textures. That's one of like the main focuses in my work. So I love the like really interesting marks that this dry brush is creating. And at this point, I realize that I don't want to just do straight lines, that I can kind of wiggle the brush around in different ways and create these like different patches of the indigo color. And then I'm trying to get closer to this so you can see it, but I'm doing like a really light mark making here. And it becomes like a really soft, like grid line with that paintbrush. I do it on the bottom there as well. And keep in mind that this is all going to get cut up and folded into a concertina or accordion style book. So that's another thing that I'm thinking of as I'm painting and creating, is that I'm not going to be able to see this. This is not the full end result composition. This will end up breaking up into smaller mini compositions, which is kind of cool because you can't control the outcome. That's another part that I love about this project. Here I've switched to a palette knife, and it's another one of my favorite colors by Lucas Paints. It's the color Arctic. And again, I'm using one tool in different ways. So with the palette knife, you can scrape the paint around, and then here I'm using it to make these like organic little shapes, almost like sponging the paint on the paper. This is a different paint brand, the Flash Paints. So I like to use the palette knife with this as well, because that's a good way to get the paint out of that little jar. And then here's another way that I'm using the palette knife, is like dragging it along, and it's creating these little like skippy lines of paint because it just kind of catches in different spots. Here I'm using a wooden skewer to remove some of the paint away. And then I realized there's paint on the skewer, and so I can kind of use that to draw right next to it. Every once in a while, I'm trying to make sure that the painting and the lines goes off the page. I never want it to feel like everything is in the center or perfectly set in the middle of the paper. I want things to like go off the edges so that when the new compositions show, when the book is created, that things feel like natural no matter what page it is, that parts of the painting are always going off the page and continuing throughout the upcoming concertina book. So I'm not quite finished here yet, but this was a good stopping point because some of these layers, especially where I use the palette knife, are kind of thick. You can see the little like waves in the paint. It's like a little bit thicker there and textured. I needed that to dry before I went into my next layer. And here's a quick glance of what my sketchbook page looks like right now, as I've used it as a palette. So things are pretty dry, and I'm going to move on now to this fluorescent pink. And I actually just grabbed this pen that I really never use. I don't really love the results from this Jelly Roll pen, so today I decided I was just going to use it as a mark making tool. And so it helped me create these really cool dots of paint. And they kind of start like larger and they work their way to like teeny tiny dots as the paint kind of runs out. So this next part is pretty interesting. I'll tell you kind of like the little backstory here. So like I said, I have a sketchbook to the left, and occasionally I'm using that to experiment or play around. And so the blob of paint in the sketchbook is like a larger circle. And so I decided to try to mimic that like larger pink circle over here on the piece of artwork. And then another thing is, over in the sketchbook, I started experimenting with this like scratching motion. Here it is. And because I was doing this over in the sketchbook, it's kind of cool that then this play informs what I start to do in the actual piece of artwork. So then I do the scribbling on that large circle as well. At this point here, I knew I wanted to use a little bit more of this yellow color with the shaper tool, and I specifically wanted to use it on the edge of the paper in a few different spots. Again, just making sure that I have paint all the way to the edge in several spots. Next up, I'm using this different kind of crayon tool, and I'm purposely holding it on the edge like really loosely to make it kind of like sloppy swirls. So this is the brand that it is. I have some really kind of odd or different art materials from when I used to teach elementary art, and this is called Bear crayons. And I will have the link for you in the description as always, but I've used this little piece to create these really different like scribbles on that yellow ochre. I specifically liked the texture of this crayon tool over the yellow ochre flash paint. Again, I'm focusing on different types of mark making with one particular tool. So before I was doing kind of like swirly, scribbly lines, and now I'm doing these more like dot, repeated like dashes. And this is the last mark making layer that I'm doing before I let the piece of paper like fully sit and dry and before I begin the folding. I also really liked doing these little dot dash marks over by these white gesso lines. I wanted to take a moment and show you another concertina book that I have made. It doesn't have the cover done yet, but I still want to show it because it's one of my favorites. It is what I call a vacation memory concertina book. And this one I made, and I show the whole process in my layered landscapes course. And that course is actually gel plate focused, so everything on this book is created with a gel plate. I mean, most everything. And the reason I wanted to show you all this particular book is because I used a different type of binding. Side note, I love that there's an actual feather in this book. So the different binding on this is that I don't use any tape. So if you unfold this, you can actually see that it's just two cuts and then fold it up. And when you do the folding of that particular style of concertina, that is when you don't have the paint showing on the front and the back. So I want to make a cover for this and like a little tie so that it feels nice and finished and complete. The process that I'm showing in today's video, I'm actually cutting strips and using tape to bind them together. And the difference here is that because I can decide where these folds are happening on my strips of paper, that allows me to have the paint on the front and back. And I feel like when you're done with this type or this style, it already feels a little more complete because it's got the painted front and back cover. Now I could still add like a tie or something, or even just put a string around it, honestly, and then it would feel a little more complete. But I just wanted to pause here and show you that there's different types of binding for different types of concertina books, and in today's video, we are doing like the strips with the tape. Let's carry on. At this point of the project, I have let everything completely dry, and I know that I need to measure things out so I know where to cut because I'm cutting this into long strips. And I figured out the measurements that each rectangle on this will be 3 inches by 4 inches. And so I am measuring out and creating the grids across the back of the painting. And then I use my cutting mat and cutting tool to cut these strips. This is going to leave me with 6 even strips, and each strip is going to have 2 folds. And here I've decided that I wanted to line up the painting, like which direction the painting was. You really don't have to do that, but for some reason I just really liked the idea of knowing that all of my strips were going the same direction that I created them. Now, to keep things organized, I need to fold each of the strips. And like I mentioned earlier, for this style of concertina, the front is going to have a piece of the painting showing, facing out towards the front. So here I'm using a bone folder as well to help me create really good creases in the paper. And I'm kind of slowly thinking there, I'm like, okay, if this is going to fold back, then the next one needs to fold in. And then that means the next strip might be opposite. So if you're folding like in and then out, the next one might be like out and then in. You just need to make sure that all of your strips are going to line up properly so that when you tape them, they're each facing the correct direction. Also, if you don't have a bone folder, you can use a brayer. Make sure there's no wet paint on it, but you can use a brayer to help make your creases as well. So everything is nice and folded and we're ready for the taping. And I'm not using anything fancy here. This is just masking tape from Walmart. And then I've grabbed my favorite cutting tool, which is this Fisker's blade. I especially like this better than my X-Acto because that orange handle is like larger and more comfortable. For the taping part, I do have some advice and tips on how to do this. I use my mat to help me cut 1/2-inch strips that will be on the front, and I use the full 1.14 inch on the back. I'm using 2 different sizes, that way more of the painting doesn't get covered up in the front. And I had a little recording issue, so this is a different piece of paper that I'm demoing on here, but you'll get the same idea. So flip the left side over and tape down, and then flip it back over and match up the next strip of paper. And so now you're starting to connect together the pieces of your accordion book. So the full 1-inch strip is on the back, and now the small strip comes across the center of the front. Then I use a metal ruler with my blade to cut off the excess tape. So now you've got tape on both sides, the back is wider and the front is skinnier, and then you can still make your crease. And I use a bone folder or a brayer to really press down that section. So here is my actual book where I've got things all taped up. So it's like one piece will be taped and then the next one's just a regular fold. So not every crease of your book has tape on it. At the very end, since this paper is thinner, I felt like it would be helpful to like kind of reinforce the corners. So I took tape and I just taped the edges of the front and the back so that it's each a little bit reinforced and like thicker. So when you're like grabbing the front or back cover to start turning the pages, they also feel thicker and stronger. If you have a thicker paper for this project, you probably won't need to do that. At this point, it is finally all done. And so here at the end, I wanted to do a nice slow flip through so you could really see all of the different compositions on each page. And for fun, I'm even adding like little page numbers on here for you guys. So if you've made it this far in the video, I would love to know which spread is your favorite. Also, as I'm flipping through this, I am remembering that I forgot to say something. You could definitely continue to like paint, draw, collage on these pages after you cut them down. I forgot to talk about that earlier, but for this project on this particular day, I was done like painting and mark making when it was one piece of paper. Like that was the extent of this project for me. Like I was making marks and creating on that large piece, and then I was cutting it down and allowing these compositions to just surprise me, and I knew that this is where it was finished for me. But if you wanted to take this to another level, especially if it was like a more important project or you have more time that day, or you wanted to further like exploration or color study, any of those things, or this could just be like a base layer for an art journal, So many options, but I knew I was done and ready to cut my book down and then call this complete. So there's definitely a lot of different ways that you can treat your concertina book. So before I closed out, I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. And as always, thank you all for being here. And I would love it if you gave a like or subscribe or a comment, however you want to engage with the video. And at the end, there will be a link to another video that you might enjoy. So after watching the flip through, feel free to click on that next video to watch, and I will see you guys next time. Happy creating!